Welcome back to Arkansas First Reports, where we bring you the news that matters to hardworking Americans. I'm your host, Kandi Cox, and today we're diving into issues that keep this country running. Literally, truckers are the backbone of the Americans, ensuring that our shelves are stocked, our businesses stay afloat, and our economy moves forward. But right now, they're facing challenges that threaten not only their livelihoods, but also the safety of our roads and the efficiency of our supply chain. Joining me today is Harvey Beech. He is the owner of Everyone on Time Safely and a key leader with American Truckers United. He's been on the front lines advocating for policies that protect truckers, uphold safety standards, and fight against government overreach. We're going to unpack the biggest issues plaguing the trucking industry today, from the burdensome regulations to safety concerns. And we'll take a hard look at House Bill 1569, the Secure Roads and Safe Trucking Act of 2025, what this bill does and what it means for truckers, for consumers, and for the future of American commerce. We're about to find out. So buckle up, grab a cup of coffee, and let's hit the road on today's episode at Arkansas First Reports. Harvey, thank you for joining me today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yes, sir. So tell me, you are, as I understand, you have like three generations of truckers in your in your home, right? And
Yes.
in your company.
Yes, ma'am. My mother and father started in 1981.
Mhm.
Both of them were driving a truck. It was back when El Dorado was a booming economy with oil in the early 80s. And they would pick up and deliver air freight between the Camden, El Dorado area and Little Rock.
Uh-huh.
Over the years, my dad started hauling for General Electric and Target when they had distribution centers here. And eventually that company grew to 400 power units. He sold out when I was in high school and took several years off. And my last year of college in 1999, he had started over, and I went to work with him and worked with my father and my brother for 14 years. In 2013, my father sold us out to a mega carrier at the time called Celadon. That is when I started Everyone on Time Safely. And today I have 4 children out there in the floor working, and we're just trying to survive these times.
Right, right. I think I told you earlier that in my family we have truckers. I have a cousin who owned a trucking company. She ended up selling, and then I have cousins, and I had an uncle that was a trucker, and then his son, was a trucker. So I understand that family dynamics in the trucking industry. So thank you for what you all do. It's very important to our economy and to our businesses. And so I just want to thank you. Tell me, how did you get started with the American Truckers United?
Sure. My partner Shannon Everett and I go way back.
Uh huh.
In the mid-teens, late, 2016, 2017. I actually had some of my trucks pulling freight for Shannon. It was all automotive freight. And I witnessed what took place to the American legacy automotive carriers back in 2017, 2018, 2019. They all started losing a whole lot of their business, and they lost business to their competition that was using non-citizen drivers.
Right.
The cost structure of outsourced jobs to other countries, and I'm talking about the office jobs,
Right. Right.
paired with the probably 50% wage of the non-citizen driver compared to the American prevailing wage for American truck drivers was just too much for those carriers to withstand. So I watched Shannon, try to bring awareness to the situation then, and he just seemed to get shut down for whatever reason. And then, years progressed. Um, Trucking did very well for several years. COVID, depending on what kind of freight we were hauling, it could have been detrimental or it could have benefited your business, depending on what you were hauling, which has certainly benefited my business.
Right.
And then we entered into these recessionary times around the fourth quarter of 2022, which, trucking has always been like this.
Right.
And for those of us that have been doing this a long time, we are conditioned to understand that, hey, it's going to be some good times and there's going to be some bad times, and good times and bad times. But as this time progressed on, and we watched the smartest people in our industry continue to miss the projections of a turnaround that was coming on the horizon, we started thinking, man, this is not a normal freight cycle. What's going on here? And then there was an accident that took place in state of Colorado. A gentleman by the name of Scott Miller, and his wife, Deanne. She's such a sweet lady. She actually helps us at American Truckers United.
Mm-hmm.
We came in touch with her, and we've gotten to know her over the last several months. So we saw this story. It made national news. And turns out Scott was actually in the trucking business at one time. Well, when you get into the story, you realize that the driver that was driving the big truck that killed Scott had been deported 16 times. He was driving for a company, I believe they were based out of California. He couldn't read or speak English. He didn't have any kind of a license on him. And that really, especially Shannon, to listen to his testimony about all of this, it really pricked him in the heart.
Yeah.
And then we got to looking and investigating at some other stuff and to see, how bad is this current problem. And we came across a story of a gentleman in Arkansas. His name was Mark Bryant. He worked at Arkansas State University. I believe he has 4 children. I have not met his family yet. Shannon has been in contact with his family. But Mark was killed by a gentleman that was from south of our border. He had only been in the country 4 days in a truck. He did not have a driver's license on his person. He could not read or speak English. And we've had a Arkansan lose their life at this point. So we really got a burden for, hey, listen, there's he and I, due to his cross-border experience and then the automotive carriers kind of going through the economics of replacement migration first.
Right.
I feel like we have a unique perspective on this situation. So we decided to start American Truckers United because there was just an absence of any of the advocates out there that was speaking about this. And we've been working on it ever since. And the longer that we're involved, the more and more jaw-dropping information that we have come across.
Right.
And we just feel that it's incumbent upon us, because he and I both, I mean, if we're anything, we're sons of the American trucking industry.
Right.
We both grew up from the time we were crawling around big trucks and around truck drivers. My mom and daddy's drivers used to carry me in my diapers and taught me how to drive. I mean, it's all I've ever known is the American truck driving community.
Right.
And the safety epidemic that is on our highways today is a major, major part of the problem. There's also economics that are attached to this problem. And American truck drivers, especially the over-the-road long-haul segment, their wages have been suppressed.
Right.
And, I engage the driver community on a daily basis. They're more demoralized and upset and frustrated than they've ever been, and it's rightfully so.
Yes. So you've just in that little bit of time, you've mentioned like 3 different aspects that you all are faced with, right? 3 a couple different things that you all are faced with within the trucking industry as a whole. And as I understand it with American Truckers United, you have 3 um, I guess you could say buckets that you all focus on, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The stakeholders,
Right.
our logo, a triple braided cord is
Yes.
mentioned in our logo.
Yeah.
And what that triple braided cord is, it's our 3 stakeholders that we're trying to be a voice for and to
Mhm.
bring awareness to the situation of what's going on. The American truck driver community and
Right.
their wages that are being suppressed through labor dumping,
Right.
the motoring public that does not realize the degradation of the safety standards of the trucking industry. Everybody expects when we're out here driving next to these big trucks that we're driving next to a properly trained and properly vetted American truck driver with a CDL. My childhood, into my early years in my career, American truck drivers were always considered the knights of the road.
Right. I know you're saying that, and Shannon started sharing that, with some of us, well over a year ago, and my mind was blown at the information that he was sharing.
Yes, ma'am. It's a lot to take in
Yes, it
for
is.
for folks that aren't familiar with what's going on. It's a
Right.
lot to take in. So the truck driving community, we're trying to fight for them. We've he and I we've dedicated our lives to serving American truck drivers. And I tell my recruiters and my operations people and my children, the business that we are in is we are improving the lives of the American truck driver, trying to give them the best trucking experience that we can possibly give them.
Right.
I tell people, if you're not called to serve others, if you don't feel inside that you're called to serve others, you really don't belong in the trucking industry, because that's all we're doing is serving our drivers and serving our customers. So our American truck drivers, we're fighting for them. The motoring public, the crash statistics and the crash data that I'd showed you earlier,
Mhm.
and really, we really see it increasing since 2016, and we believe we've identified a correlation to a policy change at the time, to a increase in crash statistics that honestly are just uncalled for.
Right.
Um, American truck drivers and American trucking companies operating under today's regulations, we are more regulated than ever before. Um, we self-police ourselves more than ever before. So the statistics should be going down. The increase in technology that we've invested in with the safety mitigation equipment on the front of our trucks, on the side of our trucks, the forward-facing and inward-facing cameras, all of the things that we continue to do to raise the standard of safety on our roadways, because we're the stewards. At the end of the day, the professional truckers are the stewards of the safety of our roadways out there.
Right.
So we got this group of carriers that we're also fighting for, along with our American truck drivers and the American motoring public. There's a lot of American legacy trucking companies we're all operating under the same best practices
Mhm.
of really self-policing, because to be quite frank, in the last several years, the FMCSA and the DOT seems to be just absent. The lawlessness that has just spread like a wildfire
Right.
in our industry. And what do I mean by lawlessness? There is now a large group, and Shannon and another partner, Cliff Bates. What an amazing gentleman that has joined our effort here recently. Um, they say we have 2 ecosystems in the trucking industry now. We have American carriers employing Americans, adhering to the safety standards that have been achieved due to the regulations over the last several decades.
Right.
And then we now also have a foreign-owned group of trucking capacity in our industry that seem to have no regard for our regulations.
Right.
I don't want to name any companies by name, but there's large trucking companies that have achieved a footprint that, there's only been so many folks get over 2,500 power units, 3,000 power units. That is known among the industry for regularly tampering with our federal electronic logbooks. And we have lots of companies that their office jobs are over in Eastern Europe, elsewhere in the world, to where all of their office folks are over there tampering with electronic logbooks with drivers on our homeland.
Right.
And, if I did that, and we would never do that, but if I did that with one of my drivers, and God forbid we had an accident and we killed 3 people, worst case scenario, that driver and myself, we're both going to jail.
Right.
Best case scenario, I lose everything that I've got.
Right.
And we have a group of folks here that are operating with complete impunity, tampering with logbooks on a daily basis. And because of where they are, there's no accountability.
Right.
To my knowledge, I don't think there's been anyone extradited from one of these other countries because they were tampering with a logbook and their driver killed someone. Now, we know that there have been accidents where there were foreign drivers, non-citizen drivers, driving a truck over the hours of service, causing injuries and fatalities. So it's a level of lawlessness that has grown so fast.
Right.
And I'm not real sure if we have people in positions of power that are even aware of it. You would be surprised how many people in my industry, in my chair as seasoned owners, are not aware of what's going on. And when you do make them aware of what's going on, it's very surprising to me the level of apathy that we've seen thus far. And I think it's because, like I said earlier, we've all been conditioned to expect cycles.
Right.
Okay. So I think maybe a lot of us are sitting around going, well, it's going to turn sometime. It's going to turn sometime. But our argument is that based on what we have found in this data, that there's not a turnaround coming because this rapid influx is continuing still today. There has not been an increase in freight demand whatsoever. We still, 3 years, this started for the weakest carriers in the second quarter of 22. So we are now in the second quarter, March, we're almost in the second quarter of 25, right?
Right.
So that's 3 years deep into this, and there has not been any achievable balance at all whatsoever. And that's because capacity continues to enter into our industry
Right.
in the worst times that we've ever seen. And that's inexplicable.
Yeah.
That does not match up with historical patterns and historical math when you study historical freight cycles.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. Never before have we had such a rapid influx of non-citizen, and I'm going to say foreign-owned, okay, foreign-operated trucking capacity that, has a cost structure that's much different than the American carrier doing all the things right the way we're supposed to. These folks have their jobs in the office offshored somewhere else, and their drivers are all non-citizen drivers operating on visas. I actually met with a Serbian gentleman that owned a company here in the States. They've got a couple hundred power units. He explained to me a lot. Which we already knew these things, but
Right.
to hear it from someone,
Right.
that's actually doing it, and his drivers, they're all on some sort of visa that requires them to stay with him for 3 years. So when you hear folks talk about the indentured servitude
Right.
that is going on, that's what we're talking about. And when you got a driver, unfortunately in our world, and there's so many of us that chose the long haul over the road segment because it's the toughest segment in our industry.
Right.
And you have to work your tail off and be really, really good for your drivers because they're gone from home the most, right? So there's been a whole lot of us that we attack that segment, and we've been flooded with competition from elsewhere in the world that, their costs are much cheaper than ours, and their service is just as good or much better, because where it takes a carrier like myself to run a 750, 800-mile load over 2 days, these folks are disregarding our hours of service regulations,
Right.
and they're actually running that load in 1 day.
Right. Because if I remember right, um, it wasn't but just a few years ago when there was regulations put out, right, about the amount of hours that a truck driver could drive in a day, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. There is an amount of hours that a truck driver can not only drive in a day, but also there's a amount of hours where they can only be on duty.
On duty,
Yes,
right.
yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
I remember when that came out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're just disregarding them.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
On a very, very, very much regular basis.
Right.
And to get back to the conversation I was having with that Serbian gentleman, and there was other people on that call, he openly admitted it
And
in front of numerous people. And
how do they justify that?
I didn't ask anyone to justify it.
Mhm. I
They
mean, in my work, I'm not a truck driver, but in my work, I travel the state of Arkansas, and on a regular basis, I may be going up to Northwest Arkansas, North Central, down south, and then back here to Central Arkansas, and that's a full day, and I'm tired, and so how as a company, and I would not allow if I have an employee that I know has driven up and they've spent the day working and it's really getting late, I'm like, hey, grab a hotel. I don't want my staff on the road being that tired.
Yes, ma'am.
And sitting behind a wheel doesn't energize you.
No, ma'am, it doesn't, especially if you got a bad back.
Right. And so I just, to me, it comes down chasing the dollar, right?
Yes.
That's what it comes down to because the chasing the dollar becomes more important than lives.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the entire point of the electronic logs going into law
Right.
was to try to do the best that we knew how to eliminate fatigued drivers off the road, because prior to the electronic logbook, we were all still running paper logs,
Right.
and a driver could fudge his logbook and all of that. So in an effort to further safen the roads, electronic logs was put into law to eliminate that and to take away the ability for anyone to fudge their logs.
Right.
But I guess what no one saw coming is that, we were going to have this now huge segment of our industry that they're willing to tamper with a federal document electronically. And Lord knows I am not a computer geek, but I would just imagine that anytime you tamper with something electronically, there's got to be a trail.
There's a trail.
But when someone is doing this in a foreign country and there's no accountability, they're just operating with complete impunity. Even on their recruiting calls, because they also recruit American drivers as well.
Mhm.
Even on their recruiting calls, they're just, how many miles a day can you run, driver? Can you run 800 miles a day, driver? Can you drive 4,000, 5,000 miles a week, driver? And that is so bold and brazen because who's to say that that's not the DOT or the FMCSA investigating you? I mean, some of the things that we have witnessed, it's just jaw dropping. Even for us that's been in the industry forever.
Right.
But to get back to why we're fighting for this three stakeholders. It's really the story of Scott Miller and Mark Bryant and others like those folks
Mm.
that those drivers shouldn't have been on our roads in the first place. And nuclear verdicts have really become a thing. Just another form of market policing out there for guys like me. Nuclear verdicts. You do something wrong, if you get caught, God forbid, tampering with your logs and you kill someone, everything is over.
Mhm.
There is a case in West Texas, and it's been several years ago, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but one of the mega carriers in our country had a driver. It was icy conditions, wintry weather out in Texas, and they were in their lane, minding their own business, operating safely. A car from across the interstate lost control, came across lanes into that truck. People lost their lives. It went to court, and the jury awarded, I mean, I don't remember the number, but it was hundreds of millions of dollars. And I believe the opinion was that carrier shouldn't have been on the road in the first place. Okay? Even though it was being operated, to my knowledge, by an American citizen
Mhm.
in their lane, operating safely by one of the safer carriers in the country. The jury deemed that the truck shouldn't have been on the road in the first place. So, our question is, how much more if someone in our country has been killed by a driver that didn't have a U.S. CDL, and in many cases, no form of a license on their person.
Right.
The gentleman that was caused the accident that killed Mark Bryant, when the police contacted the company he was working for, it's my understanding that they sent over a foreign driver's license that had the issuance date of the day of the accident while the gentleman was sitting in jail. So,
Mhm.
so that is why we are doing this, because what has happened, it is just not right in so many ways. And when the stewards of our roadways, and I am referring to my peers out in our industry, when the stewards of our roadways are doing everything that we can, and in my opinion, better than ever before, are out here, just getting decimated by the current economics that has gone along with this phenomenon.
Right.
And we have innocent Americans being killed. Someone has to stand up.
Mhm.
And, I guess Shannon and I, agree.
Y'all are that
If
someone.
not us, who?
Exactly.
There's no one else out there doing it. And I personally, approached some other advocates of our industry, and tried to get them to take up this baton, because I am busy trying to survive running my company, but there was just an absence of a voice out there.
Mhm.
So we didn't see any other choice
Right.
but to take up this torch and just start marching forward, and hope that we would gain support from the public and from the driver community and some of our peers out there to try to achieve some sort of macro regulatory change that would fix this.
Right. So I want to just spend just a moment on, like, from the mama listening today, right?
Sure.
That doesn't know anything about the trucking industry. One of the key points that I take away as a mom is that we have drivers that are coming into our area, coming into the United States driving without a CDL license.
That's yes, ma'am.
Am I hearing that right?
You're absolutely correct. Yes,
And
ma'am.
then not only do they not have the training and the CDL license, um, they cannot read our road signs. And so when you're talking about merge or,
Yes, ma'am.
the bridge could be icy, or, whatever the case may be, all of our road signs, which are really important, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I just think about all the accidents out here on the 30.
On Interstate 30, it's a
It's
perfect example.
it's atrocious. It
Yes.
is a tragedy
Yes.
what has taken place out here. Not and I think of the road workers that have been out there, and I think of the truck drivers that have come through here, and all of the accidents and deaths that are just to me, they should have never happened, right? And so you have drivers that are coming over here that do not have the training, they do not have a CDL. They're dependent if they get pulled over by using, like a translator on their phone, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. That's unfortunately the FMCSA memo that was issued in 2016
Yeah, let's talk about that.
negating the hours of service penalty for English proficiency. So in 2008, the FMCSA conducted a observance or an investigation and determined that it was a big deal that a driver operating a commercial vehicle needed to be English proficient. And at that time, there was a regulation put in place and an out-of-service penalty attached to it.
Mhm.
Out-of-service penalties in our industry are attached to violations that are putting the public at an imminent risk. The
Yes.
worst of the violations, if one of my trucks pulls across a scale house and the brake pads are below DOT specs, we're put out of service.
Right.
Your brakes could fail. You're putting the public at an imminent risk. So English proficiency, and no one can argue the fact that it is a big deal that if someone is operating a 80,000-pound commercial vehicle going down the road, they need to be able to read right lane ends in 1,000 feet.
Yes.
They need to be able to read bridge may ice in cold weather. In the larger cities, there's temporary warning signs and no accident ahead, proceed with caution. So English proficiency, lay aside the fact that it's technically law that to get a CDL, you're supposed to be able to be proficient in English, but there's been several states in the country that have loosened the requirements to get a CDL, and now we have identified through our research that there's several states in the country that are issuing non-domiciled CDLs, which
What in the world is that?
I've never heard of it until just about 9 months ago. Been in trucking my whole life, literally. Did not know what a non-domiciled CDL is, but a non-domiciled CDL is a CDL that is issued by a state to a non-citizen. And it's such a new phenomenon in our industry. We really don't know just yet what to think about all of it. We have found in our research that non-domiciled CDLs, the ones that we have actually seen, they all say federal limits apply. We've also learned that they can't even be used to board a plane in the country. So, earlier when you were talking about these folks coming into our country, getting CDLs, driving trucks, or driving trucks from with a CDL from another country, the vetting, the vetting is so important. We don't, right now, we don't know if these non-citizen drivers from many third world countries, we don't know if they've had 6 DWIs over there.
Mm.
We don't know if they've had 4 fatality accidents over there. Our law enforcement doesn't have integration with all these countries everywhere, and corruption that exists in the government of some of these third world countries. Um, you know, I don't have the article on me today, but there was a Border Patrol officer that wrote an article several years ago uh, talking about the corruption in the CDL system in Mexico and how that anybody can basically show up and buy one down there. So the lack of vetting is such a major, major issue.
Right.
So English proficiency is one of the main things that we're trying to get fixed and addressed because it is such an issue that someone is operating a commercial vehicle that can't even read our road signs. And I have been raised that I love everybody and everybody loves me and I'm not going to believe any different. So when we talk about these non-citizen folks, we are not talking about these folks in a negative connotation. We believe they were brought here to be exploited because they're all getting paid a much lesser wage than American truck drivers.
Mm.
They're being, I guess, worked like an indentured servant, being forced to drive excessive hours at a time. Um, so we are not talking bad about these folks. We understand that they are just here trying to make a better life for themselves. Now, we also know that a lot of them understand that they're gaming the American system and they're over here earning so much more than what they would at home, and they're sending lots of money back home. I mean, that
Right.
kind of goes into the economic part of this problem is when my drivers are earning, my drivers are spending their wages in our economy.
Right.
And the majority of the wages earned by these non-citizen folks are going back home in the form of remittances. So
Mhm.
it's just it's such a mess that's been created.
Right. I think about and this was a conversation, that I've heard a couple times is that when one of these drivers are pulled over, it can take hours for, like, a state trooper to figure out about their driver's license and just get all the information that they need to the place where they're frustrated and they just kinda let it go because we're into hours of trying to write a ticket.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And again, I'm going to go back to the vetting of these folks.
Right.
You know, our law enforcement is out here on these roads and they see what's going on. And the folks in law enforcement that we have talked to, they are frustrated with this situation because a lot of times they don't know how to enforce what needs to be enforced.
Right.
Um, so it's causing a problem out there on so many levels.
Yeah. So I would say that all of that has brought us to the place where we have this House Bill 1569, right?
Yes, now.
And this is the Secure Roads and Safe Trucking Act of 2025. And this is a legislative proposal aimed at increasing the safety of Arkansas roads by tightening regulations on commercial drivers. The bill primarily focuses on ensuring that commercial truck drivers have a valid U.S. issued commercial driver's license, that they are proficient in English and are legally eligible to work in the United States. I don't think it's too much to ask. It also introduces hefty fines and criminal penalties for violations related to commercial vehicle operations, especially by non citizens who are unlicensed or ineligible. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. And I just want to say, as an Arkansas citizen, how proud I am of the legislators that have agreed to try to help
Mm
and try to do something
hmm. Mm hmm.
to fix this wrong. Um, Congressman Long and Congressman Eubanks, and I believe Senator Payton are the sponsors of this bill.
Mm hmm.
And there's been objections, that this is a federal issue and all of That's been really the main objection is this is a federal issue. Which, could be argued that that's a legitimate objection because states agreed in a compact, many years ago to a universal standard of licensing standards and reciprocity and things like that. But what has happened is there's been several states that have really broken the trust of the rest of us.
Mhm.
And, I would submit that when the state of Arkansas agreed to honor reciprocity with all the other states, we agreed to honor reciprocity with a universal, for the most part, a universal licensing standard.
Right.
But we also agreed to reciprocity with the understanding that, let's say South Carolina was going to be issuing CDLs to American citizens that resided in South Carolina.
Mhm.
We did not agree to open up reciprocity with the entire third world,
Right.
right? So this is unprecedented. I mean, it's really unprecedented in so many ways. Um, but
Would you say that in the because I know that you showed me a lot of data and Shannon has showed me a lot of data, and I'm just going based upon my memory of what I've looked at with you guys, is that the amount of incidents has skyrocketed over the last few years.
yes, ma'am. And if you don't mind, I'm
Yeah,
going to
go right
refer to
ahead.
my data.
Yeah.
So, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, we have had a 79% surge in the last 10 years in injury and fatality accidents caused by big trucks.
Mm,
Now, earlier we talked about how we're more highly regulated than we've ever been. These trucks drive closer to a car anymore than
right.
they did back in the day, like a big truck. And we've got all of this technology. So it begs the question, how in the world is there such a spike in these accidents when we should be safer than we've ever been?
Right.
Um, and, the state of Arkansas, earlier you mentioned Interstate 30.
Right.
Okay. And, the amount of trade, and, I'm just going to go back a little bit to when I was a child. I was just getting old enough to be interested in politics when old Ross Perot ran for office.
Mhm.
And, he tried to warn us all of what was going to happen with the jobs of the working class. And, my grandparents, thank God for my four grandparents. They didn't start dying off on me until I was 27 years old. And they were just some of the saltiest, meekest, just the best people I've ever known in my life.
Mm.
One of my grandpas fought in World War II, came back to Nashville, Tennessee. Him and my grandmother, back when Ford made their windshields in Nashville, Tennessee, they both worked their way up over there. He was a production supervisor on one of the shifts. She was one of the main gals in the office.
Right.
My other grandparents, they had an egg farm for the military for many years and had an old truck patch, and he was a lumberjack, and he ran cattle too. Just solid American working class folks. And this great betrayal that I have witnessed in my lifetime, it grieves me so deeply. And it all started with what Ross Perot warned us all about.
Right.
And
Mhm.
after I watched him as a teenager in school, and then I entered into the trucking industry, and I started witnessing all of the places closing down everywhere and moving to south of the border. And then, of course, all of the freight started moving back and forth from south of the border. And that's where Shannon's, his career, man, I would think Shannon Everett is as exposed and experienced as anyone in our industry when it comes to cross-border operations.
Mhm.
Um, you know, that that is why Arkansas, because there's so much coming up through Texas
Right.
to the rest of the country.
Right.
And then there's, what little bit there is because we are in a huge trade deficit.
Mhm.
Us truckers, we can tell you all about the trade deficits
Right.
that's going on with our neighbors. There is, for every 10 loads coming north, there's 1 load going back down south, right? Either way, most of those loads are coming through our state.
Mm-hmm.
Our state,
Either 30 or 40.
yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Our state is ranked number 5 in the country for fatality accidents per 100,000 people. That's not a good thing.
Right.
So it's a nationwide epidemic, but it's also an Arkansas epidemic. And again, I want to say how thankful I am and how proud I am of the men that have decided to take this bill up
Mm-hmm.
and try to do something to fix this problem in the state of Arkansas.
Right. So we are, we want them to have a valid U.S. issued CDL.
Yes, ma'am.
We want them to be proficient in English. I mean, we need to read road signs.
To be able to read our roads.
And we need to be able to communicate. And individuals on B1, B2 are visas, right?
Yes.
Are prohibited from driving commercial vehicles in Arkansas. That's one of the restrictions that this bill would do. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. And there would be people that would argue that, there's laws for that. And there's laws that address the B1 visa. Okay. Well, I've done a lot of research, and of course, Shannon is a very unique researcher. He is such a nerd. But a B1 visa is not a work visa for work performed by a non-citizen for an American company.
Right.
A B1 visa is a visitor's visa or a tourist visa that is used by a non-citizen worker performing temporary work for a foreign company. Like if you were a Brazilian engineer,
right,
and there was a trade show for engineers in Las Vegas, that would be when a B1 visa would be appropriately used. And when NAFTA began, there were Mexican and Canadian trucking companies that would bring loads across the border in the trade zone, the free trade zone, and would drop off the loads, and those loads would be picked up by American trucking companies and taken throughout the country. But at some point, it started becoming where all of these carriers started popping up like crazy along our southern border, based in El Paso, based in Laredo, based in Brownsville, Texas. All of these carriers have a U.S. DOT number and a USMC number, but they're employing non-citizens using this B1 visa. And at some point, the border folks quit stopping these trucks at the checkpoint and started allowing them to come in all through our country. Very, 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 very few, and I mean like maybe, it could be less than 5 Mexican trucking companies are coming into our country conducting business. It is all of these companies that have sprouted up along our border with American DOT numbers and American MC numbers employing non-citizens on a B1 visa. And according to the laws that I have read, that is not the appropriate use. NAFTA does not address American domiciled companies using B1 visas, to my knowledge. Neither does the USMCA have any language that addresses American domiciled companies employing people using B1 visas.
So I'm gonna, as a mom, I'm speaking as a mom and for moms right now, because we talked about, and this is something that you've not mentioned, but as a mom, I can't help but think about this. We talk about safety. In my family, it's always safety first. We have some special needs kiddos, and that's always been something that we have talked about in our home. It's a word that we use often in our home, is safety first. We always we always want to be safe ourselves, and we want people to feel safe around us. And you know, one of the things that I can't help but think about, especially with the things that you see out there in the world of social media and things, is trafficking with these foreign truck drivers, trafficking coming into our country. And, of course, I told you I grew up and I have truckers in my family, and I've always felt very safe around truckers. As a matter of fact, when I was in my early 20s, I decided to pick up with me and my puppy dog and travel to uh, um, or to Arizona by myself, right? Now today, I would have a heart attack if my daughter, decided to do that. But I pulled over at one of the rest stops and got right there in with the truckers and took myself a nap before
Yes.
I got back on the road. Never even thought second about it.
Yes, ma'am.
But I think about that, and I think in today's world and with the trafficking and the truckers that are coming in into our country, how dangerous that is,
And
right?
and you're gonna have to forgive me, but I'm gonna go back to the lack of vetting of
Yes,
these folks from
right.
all over the world.
Mhm.
And there has been such a rise in freight theft
Mhm.
that coincides exactly with what we're talking about.
Right.
And, everyone in our industry wants to talk about the rise in freight theft,
Mhm.
because it affects, everyone.
Right.
Insurance rates go up. The shipping community, they're having to deal with their freight being stolen and things of that nature. So there is a criminal element in the trucking industry today that has never existed um, on this level. And okay, we're in Arkansas, and I I, I know we're I don't have my computer in front of me, but I
Right.
think the drive from central Arkansas to our southern border, I think, is about 11 hours. It might be a little bit longer than that.
Right.
These folks, they're stopping at our rest areas. They're stopping at our truck stops. You know, it would be fairly easy for someone to be abducted in this state and driven across the southern border within a 14, 15-hour period. Well, there's a lot of times where friends and family don't even realize if someone's missing over a 15-hour period.
Right.
So yes.
And then there's so many hours before they can put out an Amber Alert.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So I don't want to seem like a fearmonger,
Right. Right.
but the facts are the
The
facts.
right.
So yes,
Mhm.
there's definitely a chance that we could have young people abducted, or young ladies abducted, or young men abducted, and toted out of our country less than 24 hours, and how do you
Right.
some
Right.
so yeah, that's a situation.
Yeah.
That's a situation, and again, it all goes back to the vetting process that comes along with the standard American CDL vetting
Right.
system.
So I think that this bill, it um, definitely addresses border security and national security, right? It prioritizes American workers and prevents non-citizens from operating commercial vehicles, which you know, I I think is important. It cracks down on illegal labor practices. This bill also strengthens legal immigration and employment laws, and it holds trucking companies accountable.
Yes, ma'am. All of
Okay.
the above. All of
Okay.
the above.
Well, here's my final takeaway on this bill is it is about securing Arkansas roads.
Absolutely.
And it's ensuring qualified drivers are behind the wheel, cracking down on illegal employment in the trucking industry. It aligns with conservative principles of law and order, national security, and protecting American jobs. The emergency clause in this bill shows that lawmakers see this as an urgent public safety issue. Um, Arkansas should keep an eye on how this bill progresses,
Yes, ma'am.
right?
Yes.
So this bill has not yet been presented, right?
Um,
Uh,
no, ma'am. We are making a few amendments. I believe
okay.
Congressman Long has got it into the bill drafter for a few amendments.
Okay. Do we know when this bill might be going to committee? Have you heard?
I would expect it to be in committee next week.
Okay.
Um, that's what we're thinking right now.
Right. Right. Well, I just want to thank you for joining us today and sharing what all is going on in the trucking industry and what are some things that we need to be concerned about within the trucking industry to make our country and our state a safer place on the road. And I just, I thank you so much for what you and Shannon and others are doing to fight for this. It's a big fight. I know that again, when he has shared things with me, sometimes I shake my head and I go, "Wow, wow."
Yeah.
So, I just really appreciate the work that you all are doing. I just wanna encourage our listeners um, to really look at this bill and contact your legislators and let them know your thoughts on this bill. Again, be engaged, in the process. Tell our viewers how they can, especially those that may be in the trucking industry, how they can connect with you guys and get involved in what you're doing.
Sure, sure. Our website is americantruckerswithanas.com. We are on X at ATU Truckers with an S. That's the best way to get in touch with us. You can register on our website and join. It's free. There's also a couple of petitions on our website that we would like everybody, if you felt led, to sign and join in with us.
Okay, so truckers and non-truckers alike can sign the.
Truckers and non-truckers alike. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Okay, perfect. So give that website one more time.
That is americantruckerswithanas.com.
AmericanTruckers.com. So make sure to go and check their website out. They've got some really good information on there. They've done an incredible job. You guys just launched this within the last few months.
Time
Like,
flies.
yeah.
Yes, it's so busy. Yeah, I would say if I was gonna guess, I would say 6 months,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
something
that's
like
what I'm
that.
thinking, like, yeah, it was real close to, not far off from when we started, Arkansas First News, so
Okay.
so anyways, well, thank you to our listeners for joining in today. Make sure to, visit us at Arkansas First, that's arkansas1st.com and subscribe so that you can keep up to date with all of our commentators on there. Follow us on all of our social media, Arkansas First 1ST News. We are on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube. Just check us out. This podcast can be heard on all podcast stations. And until next time, stay informed and stay Arkansas strong.